Can you
Thank you, Dr. Usha and Dr. Sarojini. At the outset, could I thank Dr. Palniswamy for this kind invitation to be here amongst friends once again. The topic is a little challenging. It's somewhat of a new concept called small molecules, and the big benefit part was added by Dr. Palniswamy. I bring you greetings from Delhi. This is more or less known. I think we have repeatedly heard that we have a range of treatment options depending on the severity and the time. And we have dealt with it many a time. At this point in time, for moderate to severe inflammatory bowel disease, the major part of the therapeutic scenario is being held by biologicals. And they are increasing in number and they're probably getting better. Problem is that, they are injectables and they're expensive. We just discussed about this case from Melbourne. So a new set of therapies is emerging, which is coming in very silently and creeping into the therapeutic armamentarium. I'll share this case, which would be more in tone with the overall theme of the meeting of a case discussion. This is a lady, 49 years old, who came to us in October 2019 with a problem of loose stools that has been going on. In hindsight wisdom, we took a detailed history and found that there was evidence of some chronic inflammatory disorders or diseases in the family. Now, her problems had started almost 5 years before she came to us with loose stools on and off, treated with antibiotics. Then she developed red eyes, went to an ophthalmologist, was diagnosed to have scleritis and uveitis. So the ophthalmologist told her that go back to your gastroenterologist because we think it's IBD. And then she had a colonoscopy in 2016. That's about 2 years after her initial diarrhea. And she was diagnosed to have ulcerative colitis. And she was put on Pentasa. Not an uncommon scenario. All of us, we see that. 2017, she had a second colonoscopy. It was still active, so she was put on steroids. In 2017, she developed severe joint pains and was diagnosed to have sacroiliitis. So, azathioprine, I think Vinith's hot favorite, so that was added. 2018, she again had a flare of ulcerative colitis while she was on immunomodulators and Pentasa. And it was again a flare of ulcerative colitis. So it went on requiring steroids, high doses, and persistent symptoms. And then in 2019, she was put on adalimumab, one of the biologicals. It's, are you feeling it's a bit reminiscent of the case we discussed a while ago? The initial reluctance to go to biologics and then how it went up. So this was started not by us, it was by another gastroenterologist. Incidentally, this lady had been through 4 major cities because of her profession. So it's a very interesting case. So she was on adalimumab, started in Guwahati, and then 2019 she moved to Gurgaon, and this is where she was. She failed to respond to adalimumab after a while. So we did a colonoscopy and found that she had got C. diff infection. So she had active disease, CRP was 180, there was UC obviously active, but she had C. diff. So we treated her with C. diff, and it was one of those difficult cases to treat. So in spite of the therapy for quite a few days, she would relapse. So she required, I think, 2 or 3 courses of therapy in pretty high doses. Then when she improved, the C. diff went away, but the inflammatory bowel disease persisted. So we discussed the options. She had been through steroids, adalimumab, what have you. So the question came up about biologicals, and at that point in time, the only other biological in India was infliximab. So we gave her the choice. She said, yeah, she would like to go for it. And we started infliximab for a while. But after that, she had another flare. So we were at our wit's end. What else do you have? So in our the armamentarium that we have, therapeutics armamentarium, at that point there really was nothing else. So the issue came up is that there was a global trial going on in our institute, and there was something called a small molecule going on. So we just asked her if you would like to participate. So having discussed with her family, she agreed. And then we put her on an oral therapy. And to be honest, till that time, I had not been too familiar with these so-called small molecules. I had been using it more for clinical trials. Now, after that, you see the improvement was dramatic. It was an oral tablet. Her disease came into remission. The molecule was etrasimod. I will come back to that a little bit. So there are quite a few candidate molecules now, I think about 8 of them. Her symptoms improved, and if you see, from 2021, 2022 till this year, 23, she had dramatic improvement, not just in her IBD, but in her extra-intestinal inflammatory conditions as well. And this is a picture which would convince you. This was in 2020, and you see that the one which we did in 2023 during a part of our study showed beautiful colon. One can hardly make out. And she has been on this medicine. It's 2 milligrams of etrasimod from the time that she joined the study, and she has done rather well. Of course, I have some friends from England, so as the saying goes in English, that a single robin doesn't a summer make. So, so it's the same story. I mean, one case which was beautiful, we can't generalize, but the fact is this is here for you to see. Now, small molecules in IBD, these are the 4 major categories. The JAK inhibitors are well known to you. Tofacitinib is now being used quite frequently for UC. It has its ifs and buts. There is a FDA caution. But tofacitinib is a more non-selective JAK inhibitor, and there are now series available where people have used it. There's another one called filgotinib, and in fact that has been one of the molecules that we have been involved in a global clinical trial. Upadacitinib, I think, was mentioned by one of my predecessors. This has also been licensed and it's available now in USA, and peficitinib. There's another group apart from JAK inhibitors called CYP modulators. And ozanimod was mentioned today in the morning talk. It's approved in US, but we used etrasimod. That's the second one. And you know, it's interesting because whenever there's a next effort that is made to go beyond the first, it means there were limitations that you're trying to overcome. And etrasimod was thought to have less side effects compared to ozanimod, which occasionally had hypotension and drop in BP and so on and so forth. So that's what etrasimod is all about. Then there are anti-integrins. Many of them are injectable. So I'm not discussing injectables and monoclonal here, but there are 2 of them which are oral, and there is a PDE4 inhibitor which is also in the trial phase. But the ones on top, the first 2 categories, a few candidates are now available and they have been licensed. These are the new molecules being tested in patients with IBD. So it's a busy slide, but you can see that there are quite a few candidates which are aspiring to come into the therapeutic regime. And it makes it easier for us because then the panel discussion we had would be broadened as to what are the other options we have if it is not this or that. And these are the pathways for biologics and other anti-inflammatory drugs to work in IBD. Every time I think the cartoon gets more colorful and more complicated, and I hate to show these slides because I am basically a clinician. I would leave that to Vineet. JAK inhibitors, you know, there are basically 4 types. And again, the non-specific or the non-selective ones had more problems. Now people are trying to have more selective JAK inhibitors, especially the JAK1. Tofacitinib, I've just mentioned, and by the way, it's in clinical practice. In India, I know several people, probably Philip also has used it, am I right? And I had to use it once, and I tell you the response was dramatic. The issue is that there has been a caution from the I think it's the American Heart Association and the FDA who have cautioned that long-term use could be associated with cardiac risk, so that's where we are at this point in time. Filgotinib is the second one which we used, and the first author of this study, if you see, is Brian Fegan. He's a Canadian, by the way, and he was also the first author when infliximab came into the market. You know, he's a nice guy, he's been here We have toured together and given talks. So that's where filgotinib is. And obviously the results are positive. That's the reason why it has undergone, or it has got license from several countries, especially Europe. I think the US has turned down its request for rheumatoid arthritis, but it's very soon going to be available because it's a Gilead Galapagos sponsored thing. And there is a lot of politics also, I guess, which goes on, whatever. So filgotinib is there, and these are the mechanisms of action of both JAK and CYP1 modulators. The word which I liked is how CYP1 works is it's called lymphocyte trafficking. It works on lymphocyte trafficking. And it's an attractive concept, but lymphocytes are the ones which are the inflammatory mediators. So if you reduce them, it's anti-inflammatory in a way. But in a country like India, we have to be worried because lymphocytes are also the cells which are important for management or control of tuberculosis. So that's obviously a concern at the back of the mind. Etrasimod, definitely the response has been shown to be at least double that of other candidates. And it's good both for achieving remission and for maintaining remission. So this lady has been with us from 2019 till 2023, done extremely well. And it's both in terms of having got the induction as well as she's maintaining. And she's one of the 5 candidates who are as a part of our clinical trial. So what are the new approaches coming? The new approaches of obviously the biological market will go on expanding, but costs are a problem. I hope all of you know that Stellara has come into the Indian market, and the initial cost of the first dose would be 3 lakh rupees. So, 1 lakh per vial. So it's not something which all of us can afford, especially if we don't have an insurance. So those issues would come up. Undoubtedly, it's very good and effective from what the literature says. Small molecules are effective and oral, and possibly we will have to find our way as to whether combinations work. So this is what I would say, second last slide. Biologicals are injectable and expensive. So many patients prefer oral therapy, and there are affordability constraints, especially in India, at least among my patients. Small molecules may have the advantage, it's obviously got the advantage of oral therapy, and it would be probably more affordable. Efficacy and safety is being explored, but since many of them have been licensed and they have cleared phase 3, I presume there would be a reasonable amount or guarantee of safety, and they could be attractive alternatives to biologicals once you're in a difficult spot. So this is how the IBD treatment ladder now looks. So the biologicals are there to stay, and the rate at which new ones are coming up, you can't actually suppress that effort. I think that's kudos to the science that's going on in the lab. But small molecules are also coming up, and one has to be aware that they can play an important role, especially in resource restricted countries like India. So thank you very much for your patience.